Whenever you think of moege or lighthearted romance visual novels in general, one of the things many people critique or look forward to is the humor and how well it complements the romance. Sometimes you get silly waifu moe gags like in Asa VNs, or zany off-the-wall humor like in SME visual novels, or you can go all in on sexual jokes like basically any Alcott title. However, when I think of visual novels that are consistently the funniest in the genre, the ones that come to mind for me are the ones developed by Asa Project. While these visual novels aren't completely unknown, I find they tend not to be hyped up as much as titles from stuff like Toneworks, Minato Soft, or even half moege titles like from Palette. For my money though, Asa Project is in the running for my overall favorite moege company because they go a step beyond with their humor style compared to others. Their delivery of over-the-top, slapstick, savage, and stupid comedy perfectly fits the relatively underused bakage label. In this video, I'm going to go over the main things that make Asa Project visual novels stand out to me, with a heavy focus on why their humor works so well, and how they are one of the few moege companies that continue to successfully release VNs even today in Japan in the 2020s. I definitely have to give a huge thank you to a mix of Nekonian, Quinium, and Kagami Games for being the publishers to officially translate the 6 Asa Project visual novels in English we have as of early 2026. Generally, if you want to watch or read a rom-com, you have to take into account the anime-related sphere already has so many of these, especially in the very overused high school settings found in anime, manga, light novels, and visual novels. So one of the first important things that makes a story stand out is having a unique premise that entices you to read or watch that rom-com over the many others in the first place. As far as visual novels go, Ubisoft titles tend to stand out by adding some kind of supernatural aspect to an otherwise typical high school setting. Something like Marshmallow All the Way Home by Marmalade doesn't even take place in school most of the time. Instead, a bunch of high schoolers somehow end up in charge of a French sweets-inspired pastry store. And if you count Majikoi as a moege, the premise basically involves most of the heroines fighting with samurai-like weapons. With that in mind, how do Asa Project visual novels stand out? Surprisingly, they generally do not rely on adding supernatural elements or completely removing the school setting. Instead, their unique premises tend to be ridiculous situations set within an otherwise normal world that just have the smallest intrigue or possibility of being relatable or happening in real life. For example, in Renai 0 Kilometer, the entire intrigue comes from an all-boys family and an all-girls family doing a temporary family swap. The main character ends up living with one mom and 4 sisters, while one of the daughters goes to an all-guys family. They all have to survive this bizarre life because of their overly selfish parents. While parents in real life can certainly be selfish, a situation like this is very unlikely, but I guess not completely impossible if the parents are crazy enough. Karikodashi Renai is somehow an even more over-the-top version of 0 Kilometer. The main character Takuma has 4 childhood friends who offer to take him in when his living arrangements fall through, so he basically has to keep switching between their homes and figure out which one he feels the most comfortable living in. Once again, a situation very unlikely to happen in real life, but theoretically could happen if you happen to have 4 female friends who are that nice. Though in this case, it does not help that there's usually a caveat to eventually choosing a permanent house, whether it's one full of lazy women, a house with a horny widow, a house where the whole family hates you, or a lonely childhood friend obsessed with hand-holding. Koikari Love for Hire is often compared to, and in my opinion, a way better version of Rent-a-Girlfriend. In this case, Koikari is basically just Rent-a-Boyfriend. The main heroines hire the protagonist to be their pretend boyfriend for silly reasons, ranging from a girl who just wants to look good in front of her friends, to dealing with an adult-age paramour, or even pretending to be an older brother. Remember that Rent-a-Boyfriend and Rent-a-Girlfriend services are actual things in Japan, and Koikari is more or less just poking fun at some of the potential extreme reasons why someone would use that system. Futamata Renai still has the most immoral premise of them all. A sleazy, douchey main character starts two-timing and dating 2 girls at once, only mildly feeling remorse about it. This leads to a bunch of silly situations where he has to carefully manage his schedule so they don't find out, while also making sure that the people who do find out can actually help him in some way. In real life, this would be a really fucked up situation, but in the game, the silly way the main character gets into this mess, combined with the believable personalities of the characters, makes the scenario feel justified enough for you to get invested. Even the 2 Asa Project VNs that aren't quite as over the top, Sankaku Renai and Renai Royale, have relatively unique settings. Sankaku features an all-nerds club, something I find surprisingly rare. I would think more authors would want to write more otaku waifus. While Royale has a more straightforward, all the girls are obviously in love with the main character from the start deal. However, even when VNs like these don't have as unique premises, it leads to my next point on how Asa Project sticks out, in that the dialogue in their VNs is a memorable but somewhat odd mix of being savage, blunt, and stupid. While the premises are what make Asa Project titles worth looking into, It's this constant, unique, hilarious dialogue that keeps me hooked on these VNs. Most romance-heavy moege visual novels tend to rely on standard moe rom-com tropes for humor, emphasizing the cuteness or waifu ability of the heroines, whether they use tropes that have existed for decades or try for something more low-key and realistic if they don't want to go for humor. Asa Project can have some shades of this, but the majority of the dialogue from every character, heroines included, constantly use dialogue with what I like to call the Japanese version of South Park humor. Every character is more than willing to make raunchy sexual jokes with a straight face, constantly roast each other, and or just act like complete morons. Let's take the first Asa Project VN to be translated, Sankaku Renai. Despite not having the most standout premise, the title ends up being carried by the hilarious interactions between the Otaku Club members. Even though all the characters are generally comfortable enough to hang out with each other all the time, they are constantly willing to make jokes at each other's expense about their hobbies. One of the best examples of this is Nanaru, the stepsister of the main character, who is constantly willing to tease her stepbrother, but is also willing to make goofy sexual jokes about her puppies, aka her big boobs, takes part in roasting the other heroines like Shina's obsession with eroge, or the president's obsession with gacha. Renai Royale, the other Asa Project title that doesn't really have as notable as a premise, makes up for it by going even harder on the ridiculous savage comedy even over other Asa Project VNs. The premise is essentially a love battle royale between all the main heroines, who are obviously in love with the main character from the beginning. Whether they're in the club room or finding ways to get inside his house to hang out, they are very open about why they are the superior option for the main character and are willing to roast the other heroines for their faults as proof of them being inferior girlfriend material. Like how Rena is constantly made fun of for being a faker, Mari being the ultimate idiotic childhood friend, Nonoka being merely an obsessive sister, and Shione just being a stupid pair of boobs. However, make no mistake, this dialogue style is definitely around even in the titles with more unique premises. In Karigarashi Renai, the childhood friends eventually become more openly competitive about why they are the superior option for the main character to stay at their place permanently. Futamata Renai has all the characters properly roasting the main character for being a two-timing piece of shit, but also making fun of Yua, one of the most comedically assholish women I can think of, due to her being completely obsessed with herself. I could give so many different examples, but ultimately, it's the characters constantly switching between acting really stupid, the heroines making more blunt sexual jokes than the average moege heroine, and the savage roasting that's aimed at all characters and not just the main character unfairly, which happens too often in many moege. I love this type of equal opportunity joking, though it is sad that 0 Kilometer still leans a little bit too much on making fun of the main character. More on that later. While the general dialogue of their VNs is great, I haven't talked about another excellent feature of Asa Project titles, their zany character-specific quirks. Part of the characters' quirky, stupid charm, and part of what leads to the hilarious savage humor, is that most of the heroines have some kind of gimmick that makes them stand out even among other visual novel heroine quirks. One of the best examples is Shina from Sankaku Renai, who I like to call the eroge queen of visual novel heroines. Her entire life cycle somehow revolves around twisting so many conversations to relate back to eroge tropes and how much she loves them. She'll constantly make loud, perverted comments about why she loves the MC, to the point where she openly admits she pursues the main character because he's the typical generic bland rom-com protag with no defining characteristics from the medium. With Renai 0 Kilometer's Mayo and Karigarashi Renai's Kyo, both are upperclassmen who pride themselves on being extremely lazy at home, despite seeming mature and perfect in public. There are constant jokes about them being proud of their laziness, with the other characters making fun of them for it. Any attempt of them doing work is treated like a huge milestone for them. In Kyo's case, many characters end up joking that her only redeeming trait is that she has big boobs, since she can't even light a stove properly at home. Despite Hasumi from Koikari technically having more depth compared to many other Asa Project heroines, most fans tend to know her for one thing. Cheeky laughs aren't completely uncommon in anime and visual novels, but for some reason, this particular type of laugh is just so odd. The more she uses it and the more you figure out why she does it, the more memorable her laughs like this become. While Rudy from Futamata Renai is notable for being the most savage of all the heroines from that game, which is saying something, and for low-key being probably the nicest girl despite her blunt attitude, it's her unexpected interest in cosplay that brings a great amount of humor into Futamata, especially since she can go from extremely tsundere and embarrassed about her hobby, to showing it off, to going all in and using it in very silly ways, even to potentially solve some of the drama. There are so many fun character quirks I could go into that are from Asa Project VNs. I can make this video twice as long at this point alone. It's these goofy character-specific gimmicks that help make Asa Project VNs stand out even more amidst their really unique premises and their unusual dialogue style. Asa Project characters may have a lot of savage roasting, and they may even have some goofy gimmicks that help them stand out even more, but the great icing on the cake is their extremely expressive face sprites. Extreme anime faces aren't uncommon, especially in comedy-heavy anime and visual novels, and Asa Project has a lot of the standard stuff, from excited faces to angry ones. However, many times Asa Project characters tend to go a step further. I think the perfect example of this is Nokia from Renai 0 Km, known in some circles like the RVN's Discord for her particular clown face, as I like to call it. How do you even properly describe this face? It goes beyond a typical excited or happy face. All I know is it really helps show that Nokia is the ultimate goofball even among the Hinamoto family. Of course, she has even more hilarious faces, like her crying one where her eyes turn into straight up tears, and her smug face that just looks a lot odder than the usual type. Karigarashi Renai has a lot of great ones, with many of them belonging to one of the main heroines, Hiyori. While she's generally pretty chill and makes some goofy snarky comments here and there, she'll definitely turn on her quirky mode and have faces that range from her sticking out her tongue with a heart to her having a Looney Tunes style shock face with her tongue sticking out, and whatever the fuck eyes she's making in this sprite. Even her own mom, Miyori, has some pretty great ones, with her closed-eyed kissy face, and my personal favorite, one with hard eyes while she's panting. Another fantastic one comes from Rito of all people, who normally just sticks to typical tsundere-style anime faces. But when she gets particularly pissed, her eyes turn all red and veiny, and this sprite in particular never fails to crack me up. Another great representative of face variety is one of my favorite Asa Project heroines, Mari from Renai X Royale. She can have the typical Genki girl anime faces, but then she also has some particularly weird, goofy ones. Like this face when she's enjoying eating food with a sus looking face, her version of Nokia's clown face, and even one where she just looks so pissed off I can't even tell how someone could realistically make a face like that. A quick shout out to some other notable ones include anytime Kirame from Fudamata Renai throws up after having too much alcohol, Akane from Sankaku Renai being obsessed with boys love or yaoi to the point her eyes will literally have the letters BL on them, and Chinatsu's kissy eyes when she gets particularly horny from getting head pats. While not every heroine gets their own unique goofy face, the ones that do exist help make the already hilarious characters even funnier, elevating Asa Project even more for me. Now, I've mostly praised how Asa Project handles its comedy style, but weirdly enough, I think a big reason why their comedy works so well is because it actually contrasts with how surprisingly serious the drama and character depth can get in these otherwise comedy-heavy games. You would think that if a comedy game had too much drama, you wouldn't be able to take either the drama or the comedy too seriously. However, I thankfully did not find that an issue in Asa Project VNs. I'm not going to say Asa Project has the best drama or the deepest characters in the genre. In fact, one of the few weaknesses for Asa Project VNs is that the actual romantic development in heroine routes tends to be sidelined or used mostly as an excuse for more jokes a lot of the time. However, that does not mean these characters are completely bland besides comedy. For example, in Renai 0 Km, despite some of the issues I have with the game as a whole, I will give it credit. All 5 main heroines have some legitimate character depth that the main character only discovers because of the temporary family swap. Despite the zany situation, it provides a sense of realism beyond just dealing with selfish parents. In Sankaku Renai, I actually kind of liked how the main character and his childhood friend Maho are not in a romantic relationship at the beginning purely due to some accidental misunderstandings after the MC attempted to confess to her in front of her friends. This leads to both goofy drama and amusing awkwardness, and they get together in a relatively wholesome way in her heroine route alongside the nerdy humor. In Karigarashi Renai, as the main character swaps between the heroines' houses, he ends up learning a lot about their flaws you can only see when you actually cohabitate and see what people are like behind their public persona. Obviously, many of them are played up for comedic effect, but Rito actually tackles what could realistically happen when someone has to live on their own on a day-to-day basis. Despite Koikari's goofy rent-a-boyfriend premise, it does dig into the reasons why people in Japan might use these kind of services. With Emi, there are some societal pressures when people wonder why they're not in a romantic relationship yet. Similarly, with Tsubaki, she deals with a kinda realistic thing where parents can hound their daughters to get married before they get too old, something apparently especially common in Japan. Even Renai X Royale has some surprisingly serious shades of legit drama, especially around the two idols, Rena and Yuna. In Rena's case, her constantly being second fiddle to Yuna in the idol industry and dealing with her insecurities and friendly rivalry with Yuna overall, especially when romance is added, works pretty well. In Yuna's case, her being the protagonist's temporary ex-girlfriend and the reason they broke up so quickly having to do with stuff related to Mari's trauma to the main character makes Yuna's romance much more wholesome if you choose to go out with Yuna, considering what she has to go through to decide whether to continue being an idol or pursue her one true love. Finally, despite Futamata Renai having a cast full of assholes, that VN arguably has the deepest drama and character depth of all the translated Asa Project VNs to date. It shows that many of the characters are assholes because of how they grew up, with a specific theme revolving around whether they felt they got the right amount of attention from their family and how dealing with said families can mess up future relationships. But most importantly, it shows that just because you had a bad situation does not give you an excuse to be an asshole. And with that said, now that I've pointed out the main reasons why Asa Project VNs stand out to me, I'm going to quickly rank the currently translated Asa Project visual novels from my least favorite to my most favorite. Thankfully, I do like all of them to some degree. Renai 0 Kilometer is easily my least favorite, and a big part of that is because it was Asa Project's first Renai VN, and they were clearly still new to their quirky humor. It was still very funny at times, but the good humor was usually limited to a few characters and certain jokes. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of humor that felt like it came straight out of generic 2000s harem rom-coms, with too much abuse at the main character's expense, especially by Hana. I also thought a lot of the drama in the heroines' routes wasn't particularly good. Even though Koikari is generally one of, if not the most popular Asa Project VN in the West, I'd say it's my second least favorite. That's not necessarily a bad thing, it's overall decent. The rent-a-boyfriend premise does make it stand out. However, while it was decently funny, I didn't think it was as consistently hilarious as other Asa Project titles. Personally, I thought the horny twin sisters were the only constantly hilarious characters, and I found Emi and Hasumi constantly interrupting the others' routes after their big drama to be kind of a lame twist that wasn't really that funny, which brought down the quality of both of their routes. Karikarashi Renai has some very high highs, but also some kind of annoying lows. I thought the whole concept of the protagonist switching between houses was fun, but came at the cost of inconsistent character quality. While I think Miori, aka Hiyori's mom, was generally pretty funny, Ayaka's family, on the other hand, are some of the most unfunny characters I've seen in any Asa Project VN. The useless, lazy jokes for Kyo and her mom Toko got super repetitive in Kyo's route, making that route not as good as I hoped. Thankfully, the other three main heroines were ones I thought were consistently pretty great. Ayaka's mix of dere and being a savage closet pervert were great in and out of her route. Rito's route had the best romance writing, and her obsession with hand-holding with Takuma was funny even outside her route. Hiyori is now one of my favorite Asa Project girls, having a great mix of the token Asa Project idiot tropes with her silly quotes and funny faces, but also surprisingly sensible and a snarky troll at the right moments. Futamata Renai has the huge factor of being my favorite university-focused visual novel, though in this case it didn't help that I didn't like Sugar Style by Smee at all, and White Album 1 barely has the characters take part in university life anyway. Something that could be hit or miss for people is that literally every character besides Kirame is an extreme asshole, or at least not a good person. This aspect makes the game feel like the most South Park-like humor of all the Asa Project VNs. Generally, I actually really like this style. It leads to equal opportunity savagery that I enjoy, and it helps that the protagonist is actually pretty funny as well. That said, the humor can be a little annoying at times when the protagonist gets a bit too obnoxious, and sometimes the heroines can bully the main protagonist a bit too much. The whole two-timing gimmick is a double-edged sword. It makes for funny situations in the common route, but it ends up making me not take any of the romances seriously once you get to the heroines' routes. Besides maybe Miyako's, since she and the protagonist actually had an interesting past together. Renai X Royale might be the overall funniest of all the translated Asa Project VNs. The title focuses on zany, savage comedy above all else, not even bothering to take most of the drama or characters that seriously besides maybe Rena and Yuna. I could see why people could be disappointed by Royale if they preferred Sankaku or Karigarashi for having a relatively chill vibe despite the goofy humor, or preferring Koikari or Futamata, which at least attempted to have the characters have interesting enough depth. However, I was more than fine with Royale going almost pure comedy focus, since it was hilariously consistent and well done, even with heroines I didn't care about much like Nonoka or Rena. Admittedly, a huge part of why I love Royale is because I actually really like Mari. I know she's not the most popular heroine, so a lot of how much you like Royale probably depends on how much you like Mari, because this girl's everywhere in every route. But I loved her and, well, every other heroine's extreme insistence on constantly arguing about why they're the superior love interest. Sankaku Renai is still my overall favorite Asa Project VN though admittedly it could be nostalgia bias because it was the first one I read thanks to Nekonyan's translation. However, I think Sankaku has a few major things going for it above the other titles. The first is that it's literally the only Asa Project VN where I at least kind of like every single heroine, side ones included. In the other Asa Project VNs, there's at least one heroine I don't really care for, main or side. I also think Sankaku Renai's relatively unique otaku club setting is something I wish we had more of in VNs, so in a way that helps it stick out. In addition to the typical goofy, savage, unhinged humor, The fact that the group are all legitimately friends means there isn't too much real drama despite the love triangle premise. This lets the game deliver its Asa Project style humor while still keeping a comfy slice of life feel, since the characters aren't that big of assholes. I will admit Sankaku is not perfect. The romance is pretty mediocre outside maybe Maho's route, especially since I don't care for incest stories. The otaku club thing means that the most the characters will do for group outings is maybe go to the beach or Comic-Con once or twice, but that's it. Especially since there's no crazy events like the rent-a-boyfriend premise or constant childhood friend house switching. But sometimes simple is best. Just getting the core fundamentals right with its humor and likable characters is why Sankaku's my favorite. Though it probably helps that Sheena is my overall favorite Asa Project heroine still. Speaking of which, I could easily make this video much longer by ranking all 50 plus girls with sprites from the translated Asa Project VNs, but I won't do that to you, so here's a quick tier list of all of them. You can make your own if you want. I'll have the tier maker template in the description. With that, I think I've properly given context on why Asa Project VNs work so well for me. The combination of their ridiculously silly unique premises and savage, unhinged, zany humor with just enough character depth to make the characters feel human enough. This adds an odd appeal that sets Asa Project VNs apart from other moege rom-com visual novels. Though I imagine a lot of this will only hit if this type of humor is to your liking, because I know many people who couldn't read more than 1 or 2 Asa Project VNs because the humor style was just too stupid for them. But for me, I'm excited for any future Asa Project VN, especially their newest titles that aren't translated yet, aka Koibana and Renai Hajimemashite. If you have any thoughts on Asa Project visual novels or this video, feel free to leave a comment below.